The theory of value which Marx develops offers an explanation of capitalist exploitation through the concept of absolute and relative surplus value. Additionally, it gives a law of how prices are formed in the market from value, which is distinguished from use value and is considered in Kapital as what Marx calls undifferentiated, abstract human labor, objectified in the production of a use value in the context of a market which is regulated by the competition between capitals, where the technologically more developed capitals, those capitals with a greater organic composition, extract what is called extraordinary surplus value from the technologically less developed capitals. And this theory of value, which is the greatest accomplishment of historical materialism when it comes to analyzing the capitalist mode of production, offers within the capitalist mode of production through the concept of a crisis, the lowering of benefit, which implies that surplus value tends to decrease as technology increases, as there is an inversely proportional relation between value as objectification of abstract, undifferentiated human labor and technological development, which increases the productive power of labor. And of course, the crisis of capital understood as value in motion that takes place during the so-called crisis of superproduction, which happened in 2008. This theory of value, which explains capitalist exploitation through the concept of surplus value, which implies that the totality of value produced during productive activity where human labor power is objectified in a specific commodity, in a specific use value, and that value is not returned in its totality in the salary which is then paid to the proletariat or to the person who produces the commodity, so that when the commodity is commercialized in the third stage of the cycle of capital, when the commodity is assigned a price in the market and is sold, the benefit, the profit of the capitalist is greater than the capital which the capitalist originally inverted in the first stage of the cycle of capital, and that benefit, that profit which the capitalist accumulates in the form of private property is gained at the cost of not paying the proletariat the totality of the value that he or she produces during their time of work, during the time in which they objectify human labor power in the productive activity that implies the use of what Marx in Kapital calls useful work, which means objectifying human labor power in a specific commodity, in the production of a specific use value. The theory of value also explains the transformation from value into prices in the context of a market in which capitals compete with each other, and therefore explains how capital, which is a social relation, is value in motion. That value, which is human labor power objectified, undifferentiated and abstract, in order to distinguish this labor power from the labor power that is objectified in useful work, which gives as a result a specific commodity or a specific use value. And this part of Marx's theory of value explains the relationship between value as human labor power, undifferentiated and abstract, and the fixing of prices in the market. Finally, the theory of value gets into detail of how crises of superproduction, crises where capital as value in motion is paralyzed, similar to how blood, if it stops flowing in the human body, a heart attack occurs. The same thing happens in capitalist economy. When capital as value in motion ceases to flow, to circulate, a crisis takes place, like the crisis in 2008, where in the case of the United States, the government had to inject money to the banks to avoid them reaching the point of bankruptcy. The theory of value is built upon the analysis of capitalism which Marx develops in his main work, Das Kapital. In the first volume of Das Kapital, Marx begins with the process of production of capital. And in the first volume of Kapital, Marx claims that societies which have the capitalist mode of production present themselves as a huge accumulation of commodities, and the elementary unit of this social wealth, which is expressed in capitalist society as a vast accumulation of commodities is the individual commodity. Marx defines the individual commodity, which is the starting point of his analysis of capitalism, as an external object, a thing which satisfies human needs. The nature of those needs, Marx clarifies, makes no difference whether they originate from the stomach or from fantasy. The nature of the needs is not important. A commodity is an external object which, due to its physical properties which derive from the body of the thing itself, which through human labor is converted into a means of subsistence or a satisfier of needs, is thus turned into use value. Marx then says that a commodity must be considered from a qualitative and a quantitative point of view. The qualitative aspect of a commodity refers to its material, physical, chemical properties that constitute its objective use value, while the quantitative aspect refers to how the use value of a given commodity is numerically measured. So when you speak of any commodity, you always have to specify the quantity of that commodity. For example, Marx says a ton of iron, for example, 100 pounds of gold, 30 kilograms of such and such. Quantity refers and determines to the use value which derives from the physical properties of a commodity. Marx then explains how from the qualitative aspect of a commodity emerges what he calls use value. And use value, says Marx, is the material content of social wealth. But in the capitalist mode of production, use value has the particularity of being the material carrier of exchange value. And exchange value is initially defined in the first volume of Kapital by Marx as a quantitative relationship between qualitatively distinct use values, which are the result of, in turn, qualitatively distinct useful work, that is, objectification of human labor power in the specific productive activity that results in the fabrication of a particular commodity. Exchange value then is a relationship between use values of a different productive nature. They are the result of human labor power spent in different productive activities. For example, Marx gives the case of a certain commodity which is exchanged by X quantity of gold, by Y quantity of leather, and these examples, first of all, allow us to understand the quantitative aspect which always accompanies the commodity, and it also illustrates how through exchange value, different commodities which have a different qualitative aspect are related numerically through a quantitative relationship and are then exchanged. So Marx claims that if we exchange a given commodity with a certain number of different commodities, the exchange value of that commodity, which is exchanged with other commodities, has different modes of expression. But those different modes of expression must be equivalent to something Marx calls the substance of value. And the substance of value is objectification of human labor power, but it is undifferentiated and abstract human labor power. It means spending the same amount of human labor power because it's a generalization, an abstraction, which makes possible the exchange of use values, which are the result of different productive activities. The substance of value, which is human labor power, undifferentiated and abstract human labor power, is determined by something which Marx calls the magnitude of value. And the magnitude of value is determined by the socially necessary time of production. The socially necessary time of production is the average time in which a society, according to a certain development of the forces of production, to the dexterity and skill of the average worker, to natural conditions and many other factors, produces on average any commodity. And that socially necessary time of production measures the quantity of human, undifferentiated and abstract labor, which is objectified in the form not of use value, but of value. Value is expressed through the different modes of expression of exchange value, which relates use value in the form of different commodities that are commercially exchanged in the market. Marx then shows how there is an inverse relation between the development of technology, which directly affects the productive capacity of labor, and the socially necessary time of production, because as technology is increased, the socially necessary time of production decreases because commodities are produced faster with the greater development of technology, and as a result, the amount of human, undifferentiated and abstract labor power objectified in a commodity is reduced. So the amount of value, distinguished again from use value and exchange value is the mode of expression of value as undifferentiated and abstract human labor power objectified in the production of a commodity. And with the development of technology and the increase of the productive capacity of labor power, value is reduced. Because value is reduced with the increase in technology, capitalists need to resort to new forms of exploitation in order to compensate that reduction of value due to the increase of technology. So what do capitalists do? When surplus value is reduced because the amount of excedent value which a worker produces is reduced, absolute surplus value tends to decrease with the development of technology. So capitalists resort to extracting surplus value, extraordinary surplus value, from the less developed capitals. So what happens is, if a technologically developed capital produces a certain commodity in a given time, when it competes with the other capitals in the market, those other capitals, if they have less technological development and therefore the work has a less productive capacity, the capitals that produce commodities in less time than the socially necessary time of production, therefore produce commodities below the average price, remembering that the theory of value explains how value is transformed into prices in the market, and therefore gains a profit from the less developed capitals which produce a certain commodity either on the average socially necessary time of production or in a greater time than what is socially needed. Those who produce in more time than what is on average needed to produce a commodity are the most impoverished. Capitalists also result, and this is an exclusive development from the so-called theory of dependency, which explains the underdevelopment of the third world, because the theory of dependency shows that the technologically less developed capitals of the third world, of Latin America, of Africa, when they exchange commodities in the world market with the technologically more developed capitals of China, of Europe, of North America, the technologically more developed capitals of the first world extract extraordinary surplus value from the less developed capitals of the periphery, that means of the third world. And as a result, the capitalists of the third world are impoverished, and what they do is they increase the exploitation of the third world proletariat. So Rui Marini, a theoretician of the theory of dependency, says that capitalism in third world resorts to the super exploitation of labor. That means paying a salary way below the cost of the labor power of the proletariat, therefore trying to compensate for the loss of value in the unequal exchange of commodities in the market. The other technologically more developed capitalists impoverish the less developed capitals of the third world, and the bourgeoisie of these impoverished countries, due to the dynamics of the world market, then have to resort to the super exploitation of labor power, increasing absolute surplus value and increasing in general alienated work and the miserable material contradictions of capitalism.